Welcome back to the Metro on WDET. I'm Robin Vincent. For the first time since he won the role 12 years ago, Mayor Mike Duggan will not be on the ballot for Detroit mayor. His term expires at the end of this year, and that's opened up a competitive field of candidates vying to succeed him. Duggan prioritized things like ridding the city of blight, building speed bumps, revitalizing parks and rec centers, and decreasing crime with things like community violence intervention programs. Now, with 9 people running to replace Duggan, what should they prioritize? Anika Goss is the chief executive officer of Detroit Future City. That's a local think tank and policy advocate organization. In a new report, her organization is encouraging the next mayor to focus on creating more middle-class neighborhoods, generating more wealth opportunities for residents, and establishing a climate-resilient city. Why? And how can the city do those things? To discuss all that now, we have Anika Goss here with us. Anika, welcome back to the Metro.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So, Anika, not everyone understands this point, so I want to draw it out with you a little if we could. When the federal government spends a lot of money, they typically divert that spending to cities. This was true, for example, with the American Rescue Plan Act, which has given Detroit over, $820 million. Before we get into the details of your plan, Anika, I want to know, are you concerned about Detroit running out of these dollars?
Well, yeah, absolutely. It's not just the ARPA dollars that will come to an end. It's also all of the protections that we had as a result of the receivership. And so the next mayor will have the challenge of trying to do more with less money, and in a precarious economic environment, which is always challenging for Detroit. When the nation is in challenging economic times, Detroit tends to feel it the hardest.
That's right.
So yeah, it's very concerning. So the next mayor will have the challenge of really having to focus on tough issues very quickly.
In November, the city had spent just over half of that money. As briefly as you can, where should the rest of that money be directed?
Well, I think even though they've only spent half of the money, I think the money is pretty much procured. I don't think that there's like I think they've already decided where the rest of that money is going to go. Sure. But I do think that in the future and what's happening with the remaining funds should be leading us to create a pathway to a middle-class future for Detroiters.
And that's the segue to your report, actually. Let's go there. And I'm sorry to jump in, but I do want to zoom in on that because it's central to this report. You suggest that Detroit needs to grow its middle class. And that makes sense. I want to think about some of the numbers. Just roughly a quarter of Detroit's households, about 26%, are middle class. And that's compared to 39% in the region. To get to middle class, home incomes need to be at least $62,000. So first, let's start with the big picture. What can the city do to create more middle class neighborhoods?
Yeah, so middle-class households at between 62 and 155,000, and then living in a middle-class neighborhood, and that would mean that there are neighborhoods where 50% or more of the population is falling into that middle-class category. So in order to grow, because there's only 12 middle-class neighborhoods in Detroit right now. And so in order to grow, right, out of 220 census tracts in Detroit, only 12 of them are considered middle class. So that would require increasing and creating pathways and opportunities for increasing wealth. Also, increasing the opportunities to actually grow small business and entrepreneurship for Detroiters. And so some of it you also have to think about, even if we do those things, even if we grow wealth for Detroiters, how can we make sure that we are creating opportunities for them to stay in Detroit? Because that is really the critical issue.
Right.
And what we're seeing year over year is that we're tending to lose middle-class households, and particularly Black middle-class households. Once you have options of where you want to live all over the city, then you're taking that option of moving outside of Detroit.
So what are some of the things you think then will make these neighborhoods more attractive, more appealing, so that when folks reach that certain income bracket, they're not looking elsewhere?
Well, for one, I think really thinking about middle class or diverse housing choices. I feel like we often want to really concentrate and focus on low-income affordable housing, which is really, really important. We can't build a city unless we can meet the housing needs of all Detroiters, including low-income and affordable housing. But we also have to have middle housing, and that's the housing that sort of fits into between the high-income housing that we're seeing in a lot of the targeted neighborhoods right now, where housing ends up being $250,000 and up, where we're seeing home ownership really grow in that $100,000 to $200,000. So price range. The more housing we can concentrate, where you have one neighborhood that meets multiple housing choices, that is one pathway. Other things like parks and amenities, and even the tough issue of making sure that we have schools that are meeting the needs of all household incomes. So high-performing schools that are meeting the needs of Detroit families, so that you don't have to leave the city if you want your child to go to a quality school. But any neighborhood in Detroit would have a school that is competitive and high-performing.
So it is a multifaceted situation here. I mean,
it is.
I just want to, because you listed a lot of things, so I want to reiterate those. A diverse housing stock, breathing life into parks and recreational amenities, neighborhood schools, which we know some of the neighborhood schools in Detroit are the ones that are struggling the most. I want to go back to that first thing, though, which is housing. One idea that's been proposed by some is to make the already attractive neighborhoods in Detroit much more open to newcomers. That means removing single-family zoning from places like Indian Village and Boston Edison and Corktown, where it exists, to encourage more construction of housing that allows for people of lower incomes to live there. What do you make of that idea?
You know, where in other cities where they have removed single-family zoning ordinances, it's actually worked out really, really well. It removes the housing exclusion, and it actually prevents the gentrifying factors of displacement. Now, there's no guarantee that if we remove a single, just because you can put multifamily housing in, that multifamily housing is meeting the needs for lower income. But it's certainly good planning to think about opportunities where you can actually intentionally create diverse housing choices for families. And it's a proven method.
I want to, if we could, go back to jobs, just to kind of tie up that element here a little bit more. What do you think that the city should be doing to attract more high-paying jobs? Because in order to get that housing, to obtain that housing, we need to make sure that folks are making enough money to invest in that
That's
housing.
right. I think I think it's more than just the one shot of attracting businesses, right, or new business investment. We also have to think about business attraction and increasing higher wages is directly related to education attainment. We are only at 17% of education attainment, which means that only 17% of Detroiters have at least a 2-year associate's degree. And even if you were in some sort of training or trade program, we are still falling behind where we should be. And what that ends up doing is putting Detroit talent in a position where when businesses come to invest in Detroit, they're looking at Detroiters as low-wage talent. And we need to be able to move away from that, right? But you can't do that if you're only focused on the business investment side and not looking at how we can actually make sure that Detroiters are competitive and prepared for a diverse array of job roles and higher wages when they come to Detroit.
This is the Metro.
The other part of that,
I'm just going to let folks know who they're listening to, which is Anika Goss, and she's the CEO of Detroit Future City. And we are talking about a report on that issue, Detroit's future, and what it means to grow the middle class. Please finish your thought, and then I want to move us to the question of schools.
Yeah, I think, we've seen in other cities that in order to really stay at the front of higher wage, middle wage jobs, which are also jobs that don't require a degree, as well as education attainment jobs, is also staying at the front of the future of work. So thinking about alternative energy jobs, tech jobs, STEM jobs in the healthcare industry. These are all advanced, thinking about advanced manufacturing. These are all jobs that pay higher, that may or may not require a degree, but the wages are coming in higher. So really thinking about a strategy that focuses on those industries as well.
One thing you said is the idea of investing in businesses versus investing in education. And I think some critics of Mayor Duggan would say that he's been more focused and put more investments into the latter, into business, whereas with education, he's been quite hands-off. And we know Detroit Public Schools Community District has its own school board and superintendent.
Yep.
So perhaps that is why the mayor is more hands-off. But what do you think? How do we change things in terms of strengthening schools? Back to that idea of building out neighborhood schools, the schools that parents are not necessarily choosing to send their kids to unless it is a place of great convenience. Let's say they don't have transportation, so they're sending their kids to the neighborhood school versus one of the other schools in Detroit that has a better reputation, a magnet school.
Yeah. Well, that is one of the challenges, that the mayor is not in control of the schools, right? But the next mayor of Detroit has to become the best friend of all of the schools that are in Detroit. So the DPSCD, the charters that are here, the private schools, to be able to offer the highest quality and most competitive and high-performing schools to Detroit families.
Anika, I want to jump in to just say that would be such a contrast to to Mayor Duggan, to have a mayor that is, quote unquote, the best friend of Detroit schools. That would really be a change from what we have right now.
Yeah, but I think it's a necessary change, and I mean that's the point of having a new mayor. We've come such a long way under the Duggan administration, and they have done some really remarkable things. The next phase of that is to really focus on Detroiters and Detroit neighborhoods fully. And in doing that, we have to think about our education system.
In the last minute that we have here, and this is not something that I want to squish, so I apologize for that because this is one of the most important things, climate resilient infrastructure. Tell us why it is important in the last minute we have.
I think it's fairly obvious. The flooding that we're seeing that happens to our neighborhoods, why would you want to stay in a neighborhood in a part of the city that floods every summer? And then in addition to that, the challenges that we have around blackouts and energy inefficiency and heat islands because of our lack of trees. This has to be a real focus for the next mayor in order to create middle-class neighborhoods, working in partnership with the state and with GLEWA, the Great Lakes Authority that actually manages a significant part of our water system. All of that is a system that we have to really push hard for, continue to push hard for, because I know the Duggan administration has been trying to advance a lot of that. That has to be really clear that every neighborhood has to be resilient to the impacts of climate change that create the kind of damage that we're seeing currently with flooding, blackouts, and heat islands.
We're going to be taking that question of climate resiliency to the mayoral candidates. Anika Goss, Chief Executive Officer of Detroit Future City, thank you so much for joining us on the Metro.
Thank you so much for having me.
Coming up, today's Pistons team reminds us of Pistons teams of yesterday. But how similar are they really? We'll reflect on the Pistons of old and compare and contrast them with today's squad. This is the Metro. Stay with us.